The first sound the Vrikai emissary made when he entered the Galactic Council chamber was not a greeting. It was a laugh. A wet, rumbling, percussive sound that rolled off the ancient stone walls like thunder in a canyon. It was the laugh of a creature who had never once in his long life been told to be quiet. His name was Thrall. He stood 7 feet tall, a tower of interlocking obsidian scales that clicked softly as he walked. His eyes were the color of spoiled milk, and he moved with the casual arrogance of a predator who had already decided the hunt was over before it began. He carried no weapon. He did not need one. His voice was the weapon. Behind him, 3 aides in formal gray robes carried data slates. They did not laugh. They did not look up. They had learned long ago that their job was to document, not to react. The council chamber of Verithal was a masterwork of impossible engineering. A circular void cut into the heart of a station that orbited a dying orange star. It held 41 tiers of seats, each one carved from a different material brought from a different home world. Some were polished wood from forest planets. Others were bare rock from mining colonies. A few were nothing but force fields holding atmosphere in place around delegates who breathed methane or chlorine. The seats rose in steep, curving terraces around a central floor of polished black stone. That floor was where speakers stood when they had something to say. It was also where careers went to die. Thrall stepped onto that floor and spread his arms wide, as if to embrace the entire assembly. His laugh faded into a grin that showed 2 rows of serrated teeth. 41 species, he said, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. 41 seats. And yet, when I look around, I see only sheep pretending to be wolves. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Most did not. They had learned that the best way to deal with Thrall was to let him exhaust himself. He did not exhaust easily. I am here to inform you, not to ask, he continued. He gestured to his aides, who began distributing data packets to every seat in the chamber. The Vrikai Dominion has identified 3 systems for immediate acquisition. Their resources will be extracted. Their populations will be relocated or repurposed. These are not negotiations. These are notifications. He named the first 2 systems. Gas giants with rare isotope deposits. A mining colony with untapped heavy metals. The names meant little to most of the delegates, except those whose borders lay nearby. They shifted again, uncomfortably. Then he named the 3rd. Earth. A ripple went through the chamber. Not a wave of fear, something quieter, something stranger. It was the ripple of people trying to remember where they had heard that name before. Thrall smiled at the confusion. A small blue world, he said, reading from his slate. 3rd planet from a mediocre yellow star. The dominant species achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. They have no significant military presence in Council records, no allies, no defensive pacts, no history of aggression. He looked up. In short, they are nothing. He paused to let that land. The Dominion will begin extraction operations in 12 standard months. Any interference will be treated as an act of war. He let his gaze sweep across the tiers. Are there any questions? Silence. Not the silence of agreement. The silence of calculation. Delegates looked at their data slates. They looked at each other. They looked anywhere, but at the few species whose borders might be next. A young Pelhari observer sat in the 3rd tier, near the back. Her name was Vesper. She was barely 50 standard cycles old, which in Pelhari terms made her an adolescent. Her people lived for 800 years, and she had been assigned to the council as a learning post, a way to kill a decade while her superiors decided what to do with her. She was supposed to be taking notes on trade negotiations. Instead, she was watching Thrall's hands. They were still, completely still. That was wrong. Someone delivering a performance like his should have had nervous tells, micro-movements, something. His hands rested on the edges of his data slate like they had been bolted there. He was not performing. he was reporting. That made him more dangerous, not less. Vesper scribbled a note on her tablet. Then she looked up at the highest tier of the chamber, near the back, where the shadows were thickest. That was where the oldest species sat, the ones who had been members for 10,000 years or more, the ones who rarely spoke, because they had already seen every argument play out 100 times. One of those seats was empty. She frowned. That seat had been empty for 3 sessions now. It belonged to the Solon delegation. The Solon were ancient beyond measure, one of the founding species of the Council. They had no territory to speak of anymore, no fleet, no economic power. But they had something else. They had memory. And their delegate, an ancient being named Orin, had not been seen in weeks. Thrall was still talking. Something about compliance timelines. Something about resource allocation. Vesper stopped listening. She was watching the empty seat. Then the door at the back of the highest tier opened. A figure emerged from the shadows. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if his bones had forgotten how to bend. His skin was the color of old ash, deeply lined, stretched thin over a frame that had once been powerful. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, but they were not weak. They were the eyes of someone who had watched civilizations rise and fall and had learned to wait. It was Orin. He made his way to his seat with agonizing slowness. The chamber noticed. Conversations faltered. Delegates turned to watch. Even Thrall stopped speaking, his mouth half open around a word he had forgotten. Orin sat down. He did not look at Thrall. He looked at the other delegates. One by one, he met their eyes. It took a long time. There were 41 species in the room, and he looked at each delegation as if he were memorizing their faces for a ledger that would outlast them all. Then he stood up. The room went quiet, not the quiet of politeness, the quiet of something older and less comfortable, the quiet of prey hearing a predator they had not known was there. "Do not touch the blue planet," Orin said. His voice was soft. It did not carry the way Thrall's did. But everyone heard it. Everyone. He sat back down. Thrall stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed again, though this time it was shorter, sharper. "Is that a threat, Elder? From a species with no fleet and no territory worth naming?" Orin did not answer. He did not look at Thrall. He picked up a physical tablet from the arm of his chair-pressed mineral composite, the kind that had gone out of fashion 10,000 years ago, and began to read. The council moved on. Procedural votes, resource allocation debates, a border dispute between 2 mid-tier races in the outer systems. Normal business. But Vesper kept her eyes on Orin for the rest of the session. His hands, she noticed, were not still. They pressed flat against the tablet, lifted, pressed again. A small, repetitive motion, the kind a person makes when they are holding something in. She wrote it down. She did not know why, but it felt important. After the session ended, the delegates filed out in their usual clusters. The Kith Dominion representatives huddled together, speaking in low, rapid clicks. The Marin Collective delegates drifted toward the refreshment alcove, already debating the wording of a protest they would never file. The smaller species, the ones with only observer status, lingered near the exits, hoping to catch a word with someone more powerful. Vesper stayed in her seat. She watched the chamber empty. Staff moved between the tiers, clearing data screens and running maintenance checks on the translation systems. The lights dimmed to their nighttime cycle, a soft amber glow that made the black stone floor look like a still lake. She pulled up Earth's public file on her tablet. It was thin, alarmingly thin. Blue planet, 3rd from a G-type star. Atmosphere, nitrogen-oxygen. Dominant species, Homo sapiens. Sapient classification, confirmed. FTL capability, achieved 92 standard years ago. Military capacity, unconfirmed, presumed minimal. Diplomatic status, observer, pending full membership review. That was it. No mention of warships. No mention of defensive networks. No mention of allies, enemies, or even trade partners. The file was so empty it felt deliberate. She cross-referenced the Solon files. Those were thicker, much thicker. The Solon had been observing the galaxy for longer than most current species had existed. Their archives were legendary, rumored to contain records of civilizations that had risen and fallen before the Council was even formed. But the public Solon files contained almost nothing about Earth. A few survey notations, distance measurements, atmospheric composition. Nothing that explained why the oldest being in the chamber had trembled at the mention of a minor world. Vesper saved her notes and closed her tablet. Across the station, in a private corridor near the archive wing, Orin walked alone. His steps were slow, but they did not waver. A young Solon aide caught up to him, breathless. "Elder," the aide said, falling into step beside him. "Do you think they will listen?" Orin did not slow his pace. "No," he said. "They never do." "Then why?" "Because when they do not listen, the record will show that they were warned." He turned a corner. "That is the only purpose of a warning, not to prevent, to document." He disappeared into the shadows. The aide stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked back the way he had come. The HFY War Council met the next morning. It took them 11 minutes to vote. Fleet Commander Jorvik presented the numbers. 22 warships, enough firepower to reduce a continent to ash. Against Earth, a planet with no confirmed fleet, no known defensive network, no allied forces within response range. The Dominion's intelligence analysts had run the scenarios. The best-case outcome for Earth was a surrender within 72 hours. The worst case was extinction. The vote was 15-0 in favor. Jorvik accepted the mission without ceremony. It was not the kind of assignment a commander celebrated. It was the kind you completed quickly and moved on from, the way you might note a small administrative task finished on a longer list. The fleet left HFY space 8 days later. On the council station, the news spread within hours. Most delegates watched the departure data with mild interest. A few spoke privately about whether this would affect trade routes in the outer systems. The Kith Dominion filed a formal concern about regional stability. It was logged, acknowledged, and set aside. Vesper watched the departure data on her tablet and felt something cold settle in her chest. She could not explain it. She tried to dismiss it. She went to her scheduled briefings, ate her meals in the delegate dining hall, reviewed trade reports that had nothing to do with Earth or the HFY. But the cold stayed. She found herself searching the public feeds for any mention of Earth's response. There was none. No messages to the Council. No diplomatic protests. No requests for arbitration. No pleas for help. The humans said nothing. That silence was wrong. When the Pelhari had faced a border dispute with a neighboring system 30 years ago, there had been months of messages, requests for arbitration, formal protests filed with the Council, emergency sessions. That was what small civilizations did when threatened. They talked. They asked for help. They made their fear visible, because visible fear invited protection. Earth said nothing. Vesper pulled up Earth's communication logs with the Council. There were 2 entries in the past century. Both were brief, formal acknowledgments of Council directives. Neither mentioned the HFY. She searched for any mention of Earth in the HFY Dominion's internal communications. There was nothing. The Dominion had not even bothered to send a demand. They had simply announced their intention and left. 61 days passed. Nothing happened during those 61 days. At least, nothing visible. No human ships appeared at the edge of HFY space. No message came from Earth to the Council. No diplomatic contact of any kind. The humans said nothing. Vesper found that silence more unsettling than any threat. She tried to talk to other delegates about it. The Kith representative shrugged. The Marin delegate said Earth was probably too frightened to respond. The Pelhari ambassador, her direct superior, told her to focus on her assigned work and stop chasing mysteries. So she stopped talking about it. But she did not stop watching. She started watching Orin instead. The Solon Elder had returned to the council sessions, but he rarely spoke. When he did, it was brief. Other delegates treated his words with careful attention, even when they did not follow his advice. There was something in the way they looked at him, not respect. Something older, something closer to fear. On the 45th day of the fleet's journey, Vesper gathered her courage and approached Orin after a session. "Elder," she said, falling into step beside him as he walked toward the archive wing. "May I ask you a question?" He did not look at her. "You may ask. The Vrikai fleet. It will arrive in 16 days. Earth has said nothing." "Done nothing? Is that normal?" Orin stopped walking. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his pale eyes that she had not expected. Not wisdom, not patience. Something closer to grief. "No," he said. "It is not normal." He resumed walking. Vesper hurried to keep up. "Then what is it?" Orin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was so soft she had to lean close to hear. "It is the silence of a species that has already made its decision," he said, "and is simply waiting for the other side to arrive." He turned a corner and was gone. Day 62. The Vrikai fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the outer edge of Earth's solar system. Commander Jorvik ordered the standard approach formation and broadcast the Dominion's demand signal on all open frequencies. Surrender of planetary authority. Transfer of resource rights. Symbolic submission from the planet's governing body within 72 hours. He settled into his command seat and waited. 11 minutes passed. Then something happened that was not in any of the Vrikai approach models. Every relay probe in the outer system came online at the same moment. Not council probes, human probes. Small, almost invisible, placed throughout the system at distances and angles that only made sense if someone had planned for exactly this entry point. Someone who had known where the fleet would drop in before the fleet itself had finalized that position. Jorvik looked at his sensor officer. The sensor officer looked back. Neither spoke. Then the humans came. They did not come from Earth. They came from 3 directions at once. From behind the system's gas giant, from the shadow of a large asteroid cluster, and from a position directly above the fleet's plane of travel that should have been empty space. 40 ships, not larger than the Vrikai vessels, not more heavily armored, but moving in patterns that Jorvik's tactical systems could not model cleanly. The movement data kept updating and correcting itself because the human ships were not holding formation in any recognizable way. They were flowing, shifting, adapting in real time to inputs that Jorvik's computers could not even detect. There was no opening message. No demand for the Vrikai to leave. No warning shot across the bow. The humans simply began. What followed lasted 5 hours and 40 minutes. Jorvik's after-action report, recovered later from a damaged command core, described it in fragmented entries. He had trained in 37 known combat doctrines. The humans used none of them. They folded back when pressed, then struck from angles that required the Vrikai ships to fire through their own formation to respond. They absorbed strikes that should have been disabling and kept moving. 3 times Jorvik thought he had one of them trapped. 3 times the ship was elsewhere before his weapons reached it. He lost his first ship at the 40-minute mark, his 6th at 2 hours. By the 3rd hour, he had stopped trying to win and started trying to understand what was happening to him. He never did understand it. When it was over, no Vrikai ship remained intact. Some were destroyed. Most were disabled and drifting, their systems fried, their crews huddled in emergency shelters. A handful of escape pods scattered across the debris field. Not one human ship had been destroyed. On the council station, The relay feed flickered and went dark for 4 seconds. When it came back, the feed showed an empty patch of space. Debris spread slowly outward from a central point, glinting in the light of the distant sun. The chamber was completely silent. A Kith delegate spoke, barely above a whisper. How long were they watching the approach? No one answered. The actual answer, which Vesper pieced together later from the probe placement data, was 61 days. Earth had begun tracking the Vrikai fleet the day it left home space. They had watched the entire journey and told no one. They had simply waited, planned, and when the moment came, they had been exactly where they needed to be. Vesper stared at the empty feed. She thought about the silence, 61 days of it, and she understood, in a way she could not yet put into words, that the silence had not been fear. It had been patience. She did not file her standard weekly report that night. She sat at the small desk in her quarters on the council station, the data pad dark in front of her, and thought about the probe placement. 61 days, every angle covered. Entry point predicted before the fleet had confirmed it. She ran the numbers twice. The prediction required modeling Vrikai's strategic doctrine, fleet speed, and preferred approach vectors with an accuracy that her own people's military analysts would have struggled to match. The humans had done it quietly, from a planet that officially had no significant intelligence network beyond its own system. She picked up her pad and walked to the archive wing. Orin was there. She had not known he would be, but somehow she was not surprised. He was seated at a low reading table near the back of the room, a physical tablet in his hands. The light above him was warm and amber. Every other light in the archive was off. He looked up when she entered. He did not look surprised either. She sat across from him without being invited. He did not object. "I need to understand what I just watched," she said. He placed the tablet on the table. "What do you think you watched?" A species with no record of significant military action, destroying the Vrikai fleet in under 6 hours without losing a single ship, using tactics that our modeling systems could not process in real time. She paused. "I want to know what you know about humans." Orin was quiet for a long time. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to speak. The quiet of someone deciding where to begin. "The Solon have been observing Earth for 41,000 years, he said finally. "Not as a council mandate, personally, species to species. We keep a record passed down to every generation of our leadership. Without exception, Vesper waited. Other species watch young worlds for resources, for territory, for potential trade when they mature. We watch Earth because we made a decision 41,000 years ago that we have never regretted." He folded his hands on the table. "We decided never to interfere with them in any way. No contact. No influence. No action of any kind that they might notice." "What made you decide that?" He was quiet again. "We made a mistake. A small one, by our judgment at the time. A Solon survey team made contact with a human settlement. Early humans. Pre-civilization by any standard we used. The team believed the contact was undetected, clean, no interaction." He paused. "They were wrong. The humans noticed," Orin said. "They tracked the survey craft for 3 days, using methods our team did not believe they were capable of. Then they sent a message." Vesper sat very still. "What kind of message?" "A simple one. They had recorded the survey team's ship, its approach vector, its communication frequencies. They had analyzed the materials in the hull from trace samples. They sent all of it back to us, compressed into a signal format that took our analysts 6 months to decode." He looked at her. Inside the signal was one piece of information: the coordinates of the Solon home system. The archive room felt very quiet. "They had found our home world," Orin said, "from trace data, without faster-than-light travel, without any contact with any other spacefaring species. They had looked at the direction our ship came from, the wear patterns on the hull, the specific type of dust embedded in the plating, and they had worked backward to our system. He picked up the tablet again, turned it over in his hands. The message included no threats, no demands, no aggression of any kind. It was purely informational. A demonstration. A demonstration of what? That they had seen us, that they knew we existed, that if we were watching them, they could find us. He looked at her. They were not angry. They were not hostile. They simply wanted us to know that the relationship was not as one-sided as we had assumed. Vesper thought about that for a long time. What did the Solon do? We withdrew our observation teams. We moved all assets out of the region. We updated the record and passed it down. He set the tablet down. These beings on this world are not to be touched, not because they will destroy you immediately, because they are patient, they are thorough, and they do not forget. 41,000 years later, we still pass that record down. We still teach it to our children. It is the first lesson every Solon leader receives, and the Vrikai did not know any of this. No one tells them. No one tells anyone. Information about human capability tends to provoke one of two responses, either disbelief or the desire to test it. Both are dangerous. He looked at her steadily. You are the first non-Solon I have told this to in my lifetime. Vesper requested access to the deep archive 3 times before it was granted. The first request was declined without explanation. The second was acknowledged and then ignored. The third she sent directly to the Council's chief archivist with a formal research citation attached, listing her work as a study in pre-membership civilizational development patterns. That one was approved after 4 days, with a note that access would be limited to records older than 15,000 years, and that nothing could be copied, only read on site. She agreed to the terms and went the next morning. The deep archive was 3 levels below the main station ring, in a section that had no windows and very little foot traffic. The air was cooler there and had a faint, dry smell, the kind that comes from rooms where old things are stored and rarely disturbed. The archivist at the entrance was an elderly Marin with pale eyes who checked her credentials without speaking and led her to a reading terminal at the far end of a long row of stacked data cores. He told her the search function would return indexed results only, no full documents, and that any full document she wanted to view would need to be unlocked one at a time by his office. He told her not to expect fast turnaround on unlock requests. She thanked him and began. She searched Earth first. 31 results across a span of 38,000 years. Most were brief survey notations, classification updates, distance measurements. But 7 of the results were flagged with a category marker she did not immediately recognize. The marker was a small symbol, 2 concentric circles with a line through them. She had to search the archive's own index to find out what it meant. The symbol indicated a record involving a resolved conflict event, a situation in which hostility between a council species and a third party had occurred, and then ended without formal arbitration. All 7 flagged records involved Earth. She requested the first document. The archivist unlocked it after 2 hours. She read it standing at the terminal because there was no chair. It was a survey report from 37,000 years ago, filed by a species called the Tavari. The Tavari no longer existed. They had been absorbed into the Kith Dominion approximately 20,000 years ago. The report described a resource extraction operation the Tavari had begun near Earth's system in the asteroid belt. Early humans had apparently noticed the operation. There was no record of military engagement. The report simply noted that the Tavari had discontinued the operation and withdrawn from the region. The reason given was a single line: local conditions deemed non-viable. She read that line 4 times. She requested the second document, unlocked after 90 minutes. This one was older, 41,000 years, close to what Oren had described, filed by an unnamed survey team operating under a species designation that no longer appeared in current council records. The document was partially corrupted and difficult to parse, but the key section was intact. The team had detected unusual signal activity from the planet below and had attempted to investigate. The report ended mid-sentence. A second entry, filed 11 days later by a different team, noted that the original team had returned to home space and that the region had been classified as sensitive. No further details. She worked through all 7 records over 2 days. Each one followed a pattern so consistent that by the 4th record, she began writing down the structure before she read the content. Species approaches Earth or Earth system. Some form of activity occurs, almost never described in specific terms. The species withdraws. A classification note is added. The region goes quiet. The species in most cases either changed significantly or disappeared from Council records within a few thousand years. The final record, the oldest, was from approximately 44,000 years ago. The species name was listed in a script so old that her translation tool returned only a rough approximation. Something like the Wanderers, or possibly the far-reaching ones. The record was 3 lines long. It said that a contact event had occurred with a pre-sapient world, that the contact team had returned, that the world had been added to a protected observation list. The last line was not part of the official record. It was a handwritten addition in the margin, in a different script, added at some point after the original entry. Her translation tool processed it slowly and returned results she read twice to make sure she understood it. They were not pre-sapient. We were wrong. Do not go back. The formal invitation to the human delegation was drafted by 7 different council subcommittees over 3 days. It was revised 14 times and debated for 2 hours before it was sent. No one wanted to word it wrong. The final version was polite, measured. It called the incident a significant military engagement, expressed the Council's desire for open dialogue regarding Earth's role in regional security. It did not use the word demonstration. It did not use the word shocked. It said, very carefully, that the Council looked forward to a productive exchange. The human response arrived within 6 hours. They would send a delegation, 3 people. They would arrive in 12 days. 12 days. Vesper noted the number. Not the standard 30-day diplomatic timeline. Not a request for additional time to prepare. 12 days. As if they had already known the invitation was coming and had started packing before it arrived. She said nothing about this to anyone. The delegation ship was smaller than expected. It docked at Verathel without ceremony, without an escort request, without any of the usual pre-arrival communications that diplomatic missions sent ahead of themselves. The ship simply arrived, requested a berth, and docked cleanly. 3 humans walked off the ship and into the station. Their names were Senna, Dorian, and a quiet woman named Mira, who carried a single case and said almost nothing during the entire visit. Senna led. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with short dark hair, steady eyes, and the kind of posture that did not shift based on who was in the room. Dorian was younger, built broad, and smiled often in a way that seemed genuine rather than diplomatic. Mara watched everything. Vesper met them at the docking bay as part of the Council reception team. She shook Senna's hand, the human custom. Senna offered it without waiting to see if the Pelhara used it. The grip was firm and brief. "Thank you for coming," Vesper said. "We were glad to," Senna said. And somehow it did not sound like a formal phrase. The session was held 2 days later. The council chamber was fuller than usual. Several delegates who rarely attended in person had made the journey to Verathel specifically for this meeting. Vesper counted at least 9 species who had sent additional observers beyond their standard allotment. The 3 humans stood on the central floor. It did not bring a prepared statement. Senna had told the session coordinator they preferred a direct exchange. The first questions were careful. A delegate from the Marin Collective asked about Earth's current fleet composition. Senna said they were not in a position to share exact numbers, but that Earth maintains sufficient defense capacity for its needs. The delegate pressed, asked what sufficient meant exactly. Senna said it meant what it said. A Kith Dominion delegate asked why Earth had never disclosed its military development to the Council. Senna looked at him with a calm expression and said they had not been asked. The Kith delegate said that proactive disclosure was a standard expectation for developing members. Senna said Earth was not yet a full Council member and that the standard did not apply. She said it without sharpness. As a simple fact, someone from the Haven systems asked how long Earth had been tracking Vrikai activity. Senna said since the Vrikai first began expanding into the region. A Haven delegate followed up, asked how long Earth had known the fleet was coming specifically. Senna said 61 days. The chamber went very quiet. Dorian, standing slightly behind Senna, smiled at nothing in particular. A small species delegate, whose name Vesper did not catch, raised a hand and asked the question that had been sitting in the room since the session began. How capable is Earth, really? Not in diplomatic language, actually. Senna looked at the delegate for a long moment. We don't share that, she said. Not because we are hiding something alarming. Because precise capability information creates a specific kind of problem with neighbors. She paused. When a species knows exactly how strong you are, they make calculations. They look for margins. They start to wonder if there is a combination of circumstances that might shift the math in their favor. She held the delegate's eyes. We find that neighbors who do not know our exact limits tend to be better neighbors. The chamber was silent. A Dominion delegate asked if Earth considered the Vrikai matter closed. Senna said yes. The delegate asked if Earth intended any further action against the Vrikai Dominion. Senna said no. The delegate asked how Earth could be certain the Vrikai would not try again. Senna considered the question. The Vrikai commanders who survived the engagement have been returned to their home space in functioning emergency vessels. Each vessel carried a copy of the full sensor record of the engagement. Every angle, every exchange, every decision point. She let that sit for a moment. They have seen exactly what happened. We believe that is sufficient. No one in the chamber asked for clarification on that point. After the session ended, delegates moved into private clusters the way they always did. Quiet conversations. Careful exchanges. Vesper watched from a distance. Myra, the quiet one, was standing near the chamber's outer wall, looking up at the curved ceiling. She had not spoken once during the entire session. As Vesper watched, a very senior Kith official approached her and said something. Myra listened, then replied. The Kith official's posture changed in a way Vesper had never seen. He excused himself and walked away with quick steps. She never found out what Myra had said. Vesper filed her report 9 days later. She had never written anything so carefully in her career. She included everything. Orin's account of the Solon history with Earth, the 7 archive records, the pattern she had found, a marginal note in the oldest file, her analysis of the probe placement data, her observations of the human delegation in session. She included the moment Myra had spoken to the Kith official, and the official had walked away quickly, even though she had no idea what had been said. She included it because she thought the record should know it happened. She titled the report Preliminary Assessment of Human Civilizational Development and Regional Security Implications. It became the most read document on the Council archive system for the next 6 years. Eventually, it was referenced so often in policy discussions that the Council added it to the standard new member orientation package. Delegates arriving for their first session were given a copy along with their station maps and access credentials. Vesper did not know this would happen when she filed it. She filed it because she thought the information was important and because someone needed to write it down. On the last day of the human delegation's visit, she found Senna in the station's public observation area, a wide curved corridor with a transparent outer wall that looked out into open space. Senna was standing at the glass, watching the stars. Dorian was somewhere else. Mira was, as always, quietly present in the background near the corridor entrance. Vesper walked up and stood beside her. They watched the stars together for a moment. "May I ask you something personal?" Vesper said. "Yes," Senna said. "Do humans know what they are to the rest of the galaxy? I mean, how you are seen?" Senna was quiet for a moment. "We have some idea." We listened carefully. "Are you aware of the archive records? The pattern?" Senna glanced at her. "Which records?" Vesper described them briefly. The 7 entries, the consistent structure, the oldest note in the margin. She watched Senna's face as she spoke. Senna's expression did not change dramatically, but something moved behind her eyes, not surprise. Something more like recognition. "No," Senna said slowly. "We were not aware of those specific records. We knew we had been watched at various points. We knew some of those interactions had happened. We did not know anyone had written them down. Does it bother you that there is a 44,000-year pattern of civilizations approaching Earth and then withdrawing or disappearing?" Senna thought about that. Bother is not quite the right word. She looked back out at the stars. We have a long memory, too. We know what was done to our people across our own history. By each other, mostly. Every atrocity we ever committed against ourselves is recorded. Every war, every collapse. Every time we thought we had learned, and then forgot, and then had to learn again. She paused. What came out of all of that was not a gentle people. We want to be gentle. We try very hard to be gentle. But we are not naive about what we are underneath that. What are you underneath that? Senna looked at her for a long moment. Something that has survived everything it has ever faced, she said, and made a choice, a real choice, not an easy one, to build something worth surviving for. She turned slightly toward Vesper. We are not out here to expand. We are not out here to dominate. We are out here because eventually every civilization has to meet its neighbors. And we would rather meet them on our own terms than have them arrive the way the Vrikai did. Vesper thought of Orin's words. 41,000 years of a warning passed down through generations. She thought of the marginal note in the oldest archive file, added by someone who had understood something important and had written it in the margin so it would not be lost. Orin told me about the signal your ancestors sent to the Solon, Vesper said. 41,000 years ago. The coordinates of their home system. Senna was quiet. Was that a threat? Vesper asked. Senna looked back out at the stars. A long moment passed. No, she said. It was an introduction. The next morning, a human ship undocked from the Rathel and moved out into open space. Vesper watched it from the observation corridor. The same place she had stood with Senna the night before. The ship was small against the dark. It did not look dangerous. It looked ordinary. She thought about everything she had learned in the past weeks. About patience and memory. About the particular kind of quiet that is not fear. About what it meant to be a species that had already survived the worst of itself and come out the other side, still choosing to build. She thought about the Vrikai and their 11-minute vote. She thought about 61 days of silence. Then the human ship made its faster-than-light jump and was gone. And the space where it had been was just space again. Vesper stood there for a while longer. Then she went back to work. The Vrikai Dominion did not send another fleet. What happened instead was quieter, and in some ways, more final. Without Jorvik and the fleet commanders, the internal structure of the Dominion began to fracture along lines that had apparently been there for a long time, waiting for pressure. 3 outer Vrikai territories declared independence within a month. 2 rival factions in the central government moved against each other in the same week. The Dominion did not collapse exactly. It compressed, folded inward, became something smaller and less coherent than it had been. The Council issued a formal statement of concern about regional stability and offered mediation. The Vrikai did not respond. And somewhere in the depths of the Council archive, In a section with no windows and very little foot traffic, a young Pelhari observer's report sat in the queue of the most requested documents in the station's history. It would be read by delegates for generations to come. It would be cited in policy debates. It would be added to orientation packets and diplomatic training curricula. But none of that mattered to Vesper when she wrote it. She wrote it because she had seen something that needed to be recorded. An old being's trembling hands. A species that said nothing for 61 days. A marginal note written 44,000 years ago by someone who had learned a terrible truth and could not bear to let it be forgotten. They were not presapient. We were wrong. Do not go back. She wrote it because someone had to. And then she went back to work.